The scar that ruined breakfast. I said, fire him. His face ruins my appetite. Vivian Rowe didn't whisper. She didn't glance around. She didn't lower her voice to spare the man's dignity. She said it like a verdict. Cold. Loud enough to slice through the morning rhythm of Mesquite Junction Diner like a blade through buttered toast. It was 7:48 a.m. on a Thursday at a roadside cafe just off Interstate 10 outside El Paso, Texas. The sun was already warming the red dust outside. Truckers were lined up along the windows, wiping sleep from their eyes. Teachers sipped black coffee and scanned lesson plans. A couple of Border Patrol officers leaned on their elbows at the bar. And at table 4, beneath a brass light and a faded American flag, sat a woman in pearls and political pedigree. Vivian Rowe, chairwoman of the El Paso City Council. Voice like steel wrapped in silk. Her manicured hand hovered in the air, pointing not with curiosity, not with concern, but with contempt, like she was swatting away a fly, at a man who was quietly refilling coffee in the far corner, the target of her disdain, Wesley Cade. Waiter, 62 years old, left side calm, composed, right side a map of war, scarred, melted, twisted. A legacy of the fire that didn't kill him but made sure he'd never be invisible again. Wesley didn't flinch. He didn't speak. He just turned slightly, the good side of his face facing the guests, just like he'd trained himself to do. Vivian leaned toward the manager, voice coated in disdain. "I've told you before, Mason, people come here to eat, not to be confronted with that." Mason, the manager, swallowed hard. He glanced at Emily Navarro, the diner's owner, who stood at the counter wiping a coffee pot with slow, deliberate hands. Emily looked up and saw the scene and the look on Wesley's face. She walked over. "Ma'am," Emily said, trying to stay calm. "That's Wesley. He's a veteran. A good man. He's—" Vivian didn't even look at her. "Well, maybe he shouldn't be on the floor. It's not about politics. It's about customer comfort." Across the diner, 2 teenage boys chuckled quietly as they typed on their phones. One lifted his screen discreetly, capturing a photo of Wesley as he bent to collect a tray. "Harrod Diner Monster," the caption read. "Sent. Shared." Wesley said nothing. He adjusted the tray on his arm and moved toward the kitchen. Every step, even the silent ones, felt like walking through smoke. He had developed a system approach from the left: avoid eye contact, speak only when spoken to, and never ever react. As he passed booth 8, a small boy looked up and whispered loudly, "Mommy, what happened to that man's face?" His mother didn't answer. She just pulled him closer and looked away. Wesley kept walking, but someone was watching, closely. At table 1 by the window, an older man had been silent for 20 minutes. He wore a flannel shirt tucked military tight into faded jeans. He sat with perfect posture, the kind only decades of service could teach. He hadn't touched his coffee. He hadn't looked at his menu. His eyes were fixed on Wesley. And when Wesley reached to pick up a glass, his sleeve slipped slightly. The old man's breath caught. Their ink, half faded, barely visible through the scars, was a tattoo, a Cosman's cross. 1st Recon Battalion. The man stood up. Wesley noticed the motion. He looked over, cautious, neutral. "Sir," the man said quietly, "may I ask your name?" Wesley paused. "Wesley Cade." The man nodded. "Were you with 1st Recon?" Sanguine Wesley didn't answer. The man reached slowly into his wallet and pulled out an old photo, creased and yellowed. It showed 3 Marines by a burning Humvee. He tapped the photo with one finger. "I think I know who you are." Emily approached, cautious. "Is there a problem here?" The man turned to her. "No, ma'am." Not a problem. A reckoning. He turned next to Vivian Rowe. You wanted him fired because of his scars? Vivian lifted her chin. This is a public place. My job is to keep it respectable. The man stared through her. You don't know who he is, do you? Vivian narrowed her eyes. I don't care who he is. The man looked back at Wesley. I do. He turned back to Emily. I'd like to pay for his breakfast and his next week's shift. Emily looked stunned. That's very kind, sir. May I ask your name? He gave a half smile. Colonel Martin Hale, retired. Then he faced the room, loud enough for all to hear. You want to talk about comfort? That man, he pointed at Wesley, carried men through fire. I watched it. He didn't scream, he didn't run, he just kept going. Wesley froze in place. Vivian scoffed. Is this supposed to change my mind? No, Hale said. It's supposed to change his world. He walked to Wesley, reached out and shook his hand. Thank you, Doc. You were never forgotten, just misplaced. Colonel Hale exited. But before the door closed behind him, he added one last line. Ask your city records about a Marine named Hart, and tell your husband he wasn't the only one who came back changed. Vivian's fork slipped from her hand. Emily turned to Wesley. He was standing there, still holding the tray, eyes wide, the name Hart echoing like a grenade in his chest. To be continued, the tattoo beneath the collar hook. Only 3 men had that tattoo in Sangin. One's dead, one's me, and you're the third. The coffee was still warm, but no one touched their mugs. The door had barely stopped swinging from Colonel Hale's quiet exit when the ripple of silence snapped across the room like a cold wind. Vivian Rowe, chairwoman of the El Paso City Council, sat frozen. Her silver fork hovered mid-air, lips parted in disbelief. The last words still echoed, ask your city records about a Marine named Hart, and tell your husband he wasn't the only one who came back changed. She blinked. My husband is dead, she said aloud, but no one answered. Wesley Cade stood at the edge of the counter. His hand trembled slightly as he refilled the napkin holders. He hadn't moved much since Hale left. He was trying to shrink again, trying to disappear into the familiar rhythm of a shift. But the room wouldn't allow it. The weight had shifted. Something was changing. Teenagers who had mocked him an hour ago now sat silently, eyes lowered. Emily Navarro, the diner's owner, hovered behind the register watching Wesley like he might break in half. Then the bell above the door jingled again. A new figure stepped in. A woman in a navy dress uniform sharply pressed. She walked with confidence, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on Wesley. My name is Lieutenant Commander Elise Hart, she said loud enough for most of the diner to hear. I'm looking for Wesley Cade. Emily stepped forward tense. That's him. The woman nodded, approached Wesley, and held out a small, carefully polished wooden box. My father served in 1st Recon, she said. He passed away 2 years ago. Before he died, he gave me this. He told me it didn't belong to him. He said, find the corpsman who pulled me out of that Humvee in Sangin and give him this. She handed him the box. He said that man saved his life twice, once from fire and once from giving up. Wesley hesitated. He didn't take the box at first. Then slowly, with both hands, he accepted it. Your father's name, he asked. Thomas Hart, she replied. But he used to be someone else. Wesley froze. The name hit him like a blunt strike to the chest. His fingers tightened around the wood. Emily saw the change in his expression. Wes, what is it? But before he could answer, the door opened again. Colonel Hale returned, this time not alone. A younger man walked beside him, limping, military haircut, civilian jacket, steel in his eyes. This is Lieutenant Travis Hale, the colonel said. 3rd vehicle in the convoy. He wouldn't be here if it weren't for Cade. Travis approached Wesley. You told me to shut up or you'd drop me, he said with a grin. I meant it, Wesley replied. The laughter in the room was soft but sincere, but it died quickly when Elise spoke again. My father, he kept journals. I never read them until last week. And I found out he changed his name after the war. He didn't want the council to know who he really was. Vivian's eyes narrowed. Why would he hide that Elise looked her in the eye? Because he didn't want you to know what kind of man he used to be. His name was Thomas Rowe. The diner fell completely silent. Vivian staggered back half a step. My husband, she whispered. No, you're lying. He was my father, Elise said. He changed everything when he came back. Name, career, even how he treated his past. Vivian covered her mouth. Emily whispered, Oh God. Wesley sat down slowly, the box still in his lap. Elise reached into her pocket, unfolded a copy of a letter. He wrote this the week before he died. He said, If I ever found you, Wesley, I had to give this to you too. She passed it to him. Wesley read it quietly, then closed his eyes. I carried him through fire. He never screamed, but he begged me to leave him. I refused. Vivian shook her head. He never told me, never said your name. Because he was ashamed, Wesley replied, not of me, of who he let himself become after. She collapsed into a chair, shaking. Colonel Hale stepped forward. You wanted this man fired because of how he looked. Turns out the only reason your husband lived long enough to marry you is because of him. Vivian whispered, How do I come back from this? Wesley said nothing. The box remained on the table unopened, but the truth that was already wide open. To be continued. The box of silence hook, he never spoke of war. But he kept this box beside his bed for 20 years with one name inside. Wesley Cade sat alone in the break room of the Mesquite Junction diner, the small wooden box sitting before him like a ghost from another life. The letter Elise Hart, or rather Elise Rowe, had handed him still echoed in his hands. His breath was slow, controlled, but his heart thundered in his chest. He opened the box. Inside, a folded American flag, a purple heart, a black and white photo of two men beside a burning vehicle, one clearly a younger version of Wesley. And under that, a sealed envelope. He opened the letter. Doc Cade. If you're reading this, my daughter found you. I never forgot, Sangin. You saved me. You lost your face, but you never lost your courage. I lived with that debt. I let my shame bury it. I changed my name. Buried my past. Married into politics and never looked back. But you were always there every time I looked in the mirror. If Vivian ever speaks without knowing, show her this. Remind her what sacrifice looks like. She forgot, but I never did. Thomas Rowe Wesley stared at the name. The letter trembled in his hands. Outside, the diner was quiet. A respectful silence. He stood, walked out to the front, and placed the box gently on the counter. Vivian saw it and stood. Her eyes were still red. He handed her the letter. She read it slowly. Her mouth trembled. When she finished, she said only one thing: I don't deserve to ask for forgiveness. You're right, Wesley replied. But your husband thought you deserved the truth. He turned to the crowd. Veterans stood. Teenagers lowered their heads. Emily wiped her eyes. Colonel Hale stood beside him, straight as ever. Then quietly, someone in uniform stepped forward, placed a medal on the table. Another placed a photo, another a note. Each said only two words: Thank you. And as Wesley Cade looked around at the room, the same room that once shamed him, he realized something had changed. Not his scars, not his story, but the world around him had finally decided to listen. To be continued. The salute heard across the room, Hook Wesley Cade, Corpsman, Operation Sanguine. I stand today because you didn't walk away. The words hit the floor of Mesquite Junction Diner harder than any boot ever had. They came from Lieutenant Travis Hale, standing tall despite the brace on his right leg, his eyes locked onto Wesley Cade across a sea of stunned silence. The room had already shifted once when the truth about Thomas Rowe, the fallen Marine, the husband, the man who owed his life to Wesley, came to light. But this was something deeper. This was not just gratitude. This was honor reclaimed in front of a nation that had once looked away. Wesley didn't move at first. He stood behind the counter next to the wooden box with the purple heart and the folded flag. For a moment, he looked like a man barely holding on, worn down by decades of silence, humiliation, and trauma stitched into every scar. But then he met Travis's gaze. Something passed between them. A battlefield memory, a mutual understanding. Travis Hale raised his right hand and gave the sharpest salute the room had ever seen. And in that moment, something extraordinary happened. Across the diner, men and women began rising from their seats. Some wore uniforms, others wore old jackets with faded insignias. Some had no military markings at all, only their eyes gave them away. One by one, they stood and followed Travis's gesture. A retired Navy cook, an Army mechanic, a woman who had served as a field nurse in Fallujah, a man missing 3 fingers from an IED in Kandahar. Dozens stood, in silence, saluting the scarred man who had once walked into fire so that others could walk out. Emily Navarro, behind the counter, pressed a trembling hand to her chest. "God," she whispered, "it's happening." Vivian Rowe stood in stunned silence, the letter from her late husband still shaking in her hand. She didn't salute. She didn't cry. She simply watched, stripped of power, stripped of politics, forced finally to see, to witness. Wesley's hands dropped to his sides. He looked like he might fall, but he didn't. He looked out at the sea of people standing, saluting, holding their breath. Then he did something no one expected. He stepped out from behind the counter, walked to the middle of the diner, and stopped in front of Travis Hale. He returned the salute. It wasn't perfect. His arm trembled. His shoulders sagged slightly. But it was pure. And it was seen. Applause erupted. Not the kind for entertainment, but for awakening. And then the cameras came. A young woman from Channel 9 News had slipped in quietly during the commotion. Now her cameraman zoomed in on Wesley, capturing every breath, every wrinkle, every scar. Her voice cracked as she spoke into the mic. "This is not a ceremony. This is not a tribute. This is a reckoning. The man you're seeing here, Wesley Cade, has lived in silence for years. Today silence ends." She turned to Emily. "Is it true you almost let him go?" Emily's eyes filled with tears. "I was told his appearance was bad for business. But I didn't see the truth then. I do now." Vivian stepped forward. For the first time in her career, she looked small. The glare of camera lights made her mascara smear. She turned to face the room. "I was wrong," she said. Her voice shook. "I judged a man by what war did to his face, but I never asked what it cost him to come home." She turned to Wesley. "If you will allow me, I want to make this right." Wesley looked at her for a long moment. "Then don't speak for me. Let others speak who never could." Vivian nodded and stepped back. Outside the diner, a crowd had begun to gather. Veterans, students, families. People from across El Paso had seen the live stream. Some brought flowers. Some brought flags. Others brought nothing but their presence. Then a boy, the same one who had mocked Wesley with a photo days earlier, entered with his father. They both wore matching shirts that read "Doc Cade, El Paso's quiet hero." The boy approached Wesley, eyes lowered. "Sir, I didn't know. I was ignorant. I'm sorry." Wesley knelt so they were eye to eye. "You were young. What matters is who you choose to become now." The boy nodded. His father saluted. and together they stepped aside. Then came the surprise no one expected. From the crowd outside, a young woman in army fatigues entered holding a folded document. She handed it to Emily, who opened it and gasped. "What is it?" Wesley asked. Emily read aloud. "An official proclamation from the city of El Paso, renaming this diner in honor of Cosman Wesley Cade." The room erupted. People stood, applauded, embraced, veterans in tears, young people filming every moment. Emily added, voice cracking, "Starting tomorrow, this place will be called Cade's Corner. Veterans eat free, always." Wesley stood still, eyes wide. Then he whispered, "I didn't ask for this." Emily replied, "You didn't have to, but we needed it." Colonel Hale approached and handed Wesley a small box. Wesley opened it. Inside was a silver star. "It was approved years ago," Hale said, "but you moved before it could be delivered. I kept it. Figured maybe you'd want it one day." Wesley stared at the medal, then looked at the faces around him, the crowd, the community, the changed hearts. He didn't need the medal, but he took it. Not for himself, for the brothers who never made it back, for the memories he never shared, for the silence that had finally been broken. And just as he turned to return to the kitchen, the bell rang one last time. A young Marine stepped inside with a framed photo in his hands. "I think this belongs here," he said. He placed it on the wall. It showed a younger Wesley Cade, burned, bleeding, carrying a wounded soldier on his back through fire. Behind them, an American flag flapped, tattered but unbroken. Beneath the photo, the inscription read, "Courage is not loud. It carries others when they can't walk." To be continued. If this part moved you, subscribe and stay tuned. The final chapter is coming, part 5, The Man Who Refused the Medal. The Man Who Refused the Medal hook. Comodo, I don't need a medal. I need a world where men like me aren't made to feel like monsters. The morning hours after the salute, the diner opened at 6 a.m. sharp, just like it always had. But nothing inside Mesquite Junction felt the same. The walls, once lined with coffee specials and faded license plates, now held framed letters, challenge coins, and photos not of celebrities, but of men and women who had worn the uniform. And in the center, beneath the flickering light above booth 3, hung the photo of Wesley Cade carrying a wounded Marine through smoke and flame, an American flag barely visible behind him. The sign above the door now read, "Cade's Corner." Beneath it, "Veterans eat free, always." But Wesley Cade, the man who had spent years serving silently, enduring stares, insults, and silence, was not at the register. He was not at the griddle. He was not even in the break room. He was out back, sitting alone in the gravel lot, a cup of black coffee cooling in his hands. The silver star was in his apron pocket, still in the box, still unopened since Colonel Hale had handed it to him the day before. Emily Navarro found him there, quiet, still, the same way he had looked the day he first applied for the job 3 years ago. Back then she hadn't known who he was, and honestly, neither had he. "You okay?" she asked. Wesley didn't look up. "I'm fine, just tired." She sat beside him. The silence between them was heavy but not empty. "You're a hard man to celebrate," she said gently. He gave a faint smile. "That's because I don't want to be celebrated. I just want to work. I want to matter without being put on display." Emily reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a letter. It came this morning. Pentagon letterhead. Certified. He took it, opened it slowly. It read, "Mr. Cade, upon further review of your actions during Operation Sanguine, we are formally reinstating your Silver Star Commendation and recommending an elevation to the Medal of Honor. Ceremony to be held in Washington, D.C. Full travel arrangements will be provided." Wesley folded the letter carefully. then placed it in the trash can beside him. Emily's eyes widened. "You're not going, no," he said. "Because if they didn't want me when I was disfigured, when I was clearing plates, when I was silent, they don't deserve me now." Emily looked down. "I understand. But maybe it's not for them. Maybe it's for the kids who saw you rise again, for the veterans who still hide." He didn't respond. Inside the diner, Travis Hale was talking to a group of high school students. He pointed to a poster of Wesley and said, "That's what courage looks like. Not medals, not parades, quiet dignity." The bell rang. Vivian Rowe entered. She looked different. Not because of makeup or clothes. She wore no jewelry now, no tailored jacket. She wore humility like armor. She approached Wesley outside. "I know I'm the last person you want to see." Wesley didn't reply. "I spoke to the council this morning," she continued. "I resigned, effective immediately." He finally looked at her. "You didn't have to do that." She nodded. "I did, because I was supposed to represent this city, and all I did was shame it." Her voice cracked. "You saved my husband. You gave me a daughter. And I repaid that with cruelty, with arrogance. I used my power to belittle the very kind of man who built this country." Wesley nodded slowly. "You said some things you can't take back. I know. That's why I won't ask for forgiveness again. I'll just live like a woman who doesn't deserve it, and maybe someday that'll be enough." She placed something on the table beside him, her late husband's folded flag. "He wanted you to have it, said you earned it more than he ever did." She turned and walked away. Inside, Emily held the door open for Wesley. "You don't have to be a hero today," she said softly. "Just be here." He stepped inside. People didn't swarm him. They didn't cheer. They just nodded, smiled, and sat a little straighter. A teenager from the booth that once mocked him now worked weekends at the diner. He wore a new shirt that read, "Scars are the proof he stayed." Near the window, a young mother fed her baby, while her husband, a Marine in uniform, watched Wesley like he was watching a monument come to life. And then came the last surprise. At 10:30 a.m., a small group of students entered. Elise Hart led them, now known publicly as Elise Rowe, her true name. She had organized a weekly program at Cade's Corner called Stories That Save. Young people would come not to take photos, but to listen, to ask, to learn. Wesley didn't lead the first session. He just watched. And for the first time in decades, his silence wasn't a defense. It was a choice. He looked at the photo on the wall, then out the window, and whispered to himself, "I don't need a medal. I just needed to know someone remembered." Outside, the sun warmed the gravel, the wind nudged the flag on the diner's pole, and the world, just for a moment, felt like it might be okay. Because one scarred man refused to disappear. Because one truth refused to stay buried. Because sometimes dignity doesn't come from the uniform, it comes from what you endure when it's gone. And sometimes the man who clears your table once held your whole life in his hands. The end. Moral reflection. Ket Thuk, have we judged others too quickly based on what we saw or what we refused to see? How many quiet heroes pass by us each day, carrying scars we never earned the right to question? If you believe scars are not shame but silent medals of honor, share this story. And if someone like Wesley Cade has ever crossed your path, let them know you finally see them. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more stories that honor those who were forgotten until now.